Hey, welcome. So today, we're going to do something a little different. We're basically going to become intellectual detectives. We're going to follow a hidden trail of breadcrumbs that connects a 15th century Christian cardinal, a 12th century Jewish philosopher, and a really ancient idea that completely changed how we think about infinity. All right, so here's our roadmap for this whole thing. We're going to kick it off with a paradox that honestly feels like it should break your brain. From there, we'll trace the idea it sparked backward in time, finding the philosophical tools and, the ancient root that made it all happen. So let's just dive right in with that puzzle.
First up, the paradox of infinity. Yeah, we're starting with a real head-scratcher, one that seems to throw all the rules of logic we think we know right out the window.
I mean, just think about that for a second. In our world, a circle and a straight line are, well, they're opposites, right? One is the very definition of a curve, and the other is the total lack of a curve. So how in the world could they ever be the same thing?
This really gets at something fundamental about how our minds work. We make sense of the world through these kinds of opposites. We only really know what hot is because we've experienced cold. Our entire system for reasoning is built on these separate, finite boxes. But what happens when we try to apply that same logic to something that has no limits, something, infinite?
Well, this is the exact question that totally captivated this 15th century thinker, Nicholas of Cusa. And he wasn't afraid to go there. He basically argued that once you get to the level of the absolute infinite, our little finite rules just don't apply anymore.
And that brings us right to Cusa's big idea, his most famous idea, the coincidence of opposites. It's a concept that suggests, maybe, the smartest thing you can do is realize what you can't know. So here it is, the formal definition. Coincidentia Oppositorum. It's this really radical idea that in the ultimate, infinite reality, which for Cusa was God, all the contradictions that define our world, like large and small, light and dark, they just dissolve. They resolve into one single, perfect unity. But here's the thing, Cusa didn't just pull this out of thin air. His major work from 1440 on learned ignorance was massively influenced by a book written 2 whole centuries earlier by the legendary Jewish philosopher Moses Maimonides. And that connection, that's the key to our whole detective story. So this is where the idea of learned ignorance comes in. Cusa basically said that since our minds are finite, trying to fully grasp the infinite is like trying to hold the entire ocean in a teacup. It just won't work. So for him, real wisdom wasn't about having all the answers. It was about truly understanding the limits of your own mind.
And here's how Cusa put this whole thing into practice. He said that in the infinite, the absolute biggest thing is also the absolute smallest. And remember our puzzle from the beginning? He used a pretty cool mathematical image. Imagine a circle's radius growing and growing, heading toward infinity. Eventually, its curve gets so incredibly wide and flat that it actually becomes a straight line. Curvature and straightness become one and the same.
Okay, this all sounds incredibly deep, right? But you've got to be wondering, how on earth did Cusa even get there? I mean, what gave him the intellectual permission to make a jump like that? Well, the answer is, he found the philosophical toolkit he needed in the work of Maimonides.
Maimonides was a huge proponent of a method called negative theology. And the core idea is actually pretty simple, but it's super powerful. It goes like this. Any positive thing we say about an infinite God automatically puts a limit on him, using our finite human words. So the only truly accurate way to talk about God is to talk about what God is not. Okay, let's break this down, because the logic here is fascinating. Maimonides said that if you say God is wise and God is powerful, it kind of implies that wisdom and power are these separate little parts inside of God. And that would totally shatter the idea of a perfect, simple unity. But if you say God is not weak, you're not adding a part to God, you're just taking away a limitation from your own mind. See the difference? So yeah, at the end of the day, for Maimonides, the #1 priority was protecting the absolute, indivisible simplicity of God. And this path of negation was the only way he could see to do that without tying himself in logical knots. And this is the aha moment. This is the big connection. Cusa takes Maimonides' method and just pushes it all the way. He basically reasoned, okay, if God is truly beyond any label we can stick on him, like good, and even beyond its opposite, not good, then God can't be defined by either one. Instead, God has to be the single reality where those opposites come from in the first place, and where they're ultimately resolved. He's not one or the other. He's the source of both.
So, we've connected Cusa back to Maimonides. But why? Why was Maimonides so fiercely dedicated to this idea of an absolutely simple, partless being? Well, it's because his entire philosophical system was built to defend one of the most central concepts from his own Jewish tradition.
And that concept is Echad. This Hebrew word, it's not just the number one, like in 1, 2, 3. It means something way deeper. It signifies a totally unique kind of oneness, a unity that is absolute, simple, and has no parts. It's the idea of a perfect, seamless whole.
And this idea comes from the very heart of Judaism itself, the Shema, which is its central declaration of faith. Maimonides' whole philosophical project, using negative theology, it was all designed to protect the deep meaning of this single, incredibly powerful word, Echad.
Okay, so now we can put all the pieces of our puzzle together. Let's trace this whole thing out and see the clear, unbroken chain of thought that our detective work has uncovered.
So check this out. It's a perfect three-step flow. It all starts with the core principle of Echad, this idea of absolute, indivisible oneness. Then you get Maimonides, who creates a method, negative theology, to philosophically guard that oneness. And finally, Cusa comes along, takes that method, and follows it to its ultimate conclusion, that a truly absolute one must be the thing that contains and resolves all opposites within itself.
And when you step back and look at it, the journey of this idea is just incredible. You have a famous Christian philosophical concept, the coincidence of opposites, built directly on top of a Jewish philosophical method, which was itself created to defend a core Jewish theological principle. It's just a beautiful example of how ideas can travel and evolve across cultures and centuries. And that leaves us with one last thing to chew on. You know, if these brilliant thinkers could see opposites like a curve and a straight line as just two sides of the same coin, what about the opposites we deal with every day? In science, you've got the wave and the particle. In politics, you've got left and right. And even in our own lives, strength and vulnerability. Could they also just be two different ways of looking at a single, much bigger truth? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining me.